All right, let's begin. Tonight's guest, Irish Yamashita, was nominated for a Best Original Screenplay Academy Award in 2007 for the outstanding Clint Eastwood directed film, Letters from Iwo Jima. Now she's delving into the book writing scene with Berkeley Books, A City Under One Roof. It's a page-turning claustrophobic thriller that took this normally slow reader about just over a day to read, and maybe one night of lacking sleep too because of the content. Kirkus reviewed the book industry equivalent of Rotten Tomatoes or the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, gave it a coveted starred review, and called it an offbeat, sharply written thriller. Please welcome Irish Yamashita.
Hello, it's so nice to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. Obviously, you're known for being a screenwriter, but I read somewhere that you wanted to become a novelist first. So what was going on then?
Yeah, I mean, ever since I was little, I really wanted to be a novelist. And my minor was writing prose fiction. But my problem was that I had a difficult time actually finishing a novel. So I kind of saw that, everybody was writing a screenplay in Los Angeles. So I thought, oh, maybe I should give that a try. So I started taking night classes at UCLA Extension in screenwriting. And I found that it's much shorter. There's, only about 100 pages or so for a screenplay and a lot of white space. And I found that I could actually finish a screenplay. So I jumped over to that and I started, so that's where I got my foot in the door.
Okay, and then this opportunity just came out of the sky for you. Clint Eastwood just knocked on your door and said, Irish, can you write something for me?
Yeah, I after I had taken the classes, I started to enter some screenplay competitions with the screenplay that I had finished, and I won one of the contests where a judge was a creative artists agency or CAA agent, and so that's how I got representation. And after that, it was a few years before she got me this job, which came about because Paul Haggis, who was working with Clint Eastwood already on Flags of Our Fathers, was helping him look for a writer to do the Japanese perspective, because they both actually, they wanted someone who had authenticity, someone who knew about Japanese culture. And so his agency was also CAA, and that's how my agent heard about it. So it was kind of like being at the right place at the right time, and then lightning struck. And I was able to get an interview with Paul Haggis and pitched my take, and he liked it. And then he got me a meeting with Clint Eastwood, and I pitched it to him, and he liked it. And that's how I got the job.
If you're not familiar with movies, Paul Haggis is an Academy Award winner as well for Crash. So you have these two.
Working on that.
Oh, okay.
At the time, so that's why he was too busy, right?
Oh, wow. So I got to ask before we talk about the book, it's like that experience. I mean, having these two big powerhouse people with such a cachet behind them coming up to an unknown writer. I mean, how did that make you feel? I would be overwhelmed.
When my agent told me about this project, she said it's a companion film to Flags of Our Fathers, and neither of us knew what did that mean. What's a companion film?
Yeah.
So I was just going under the assumption that it was an extra on the DVD. That's what it was going to be. Like, it wasn't actually going to be in the movie theaters. That was in my head. So, I mean, I was still really nervous pitching to Paul Haggis and Clint Eastwood, of course. But even after I got the job, my assumption was still that it was not going to be seen in theaters. And I think maybe on the third meeting with Paul Haggis, I was like, so is this going to go in theaters? And he said, yes. And I said, oh, it's, and at the time they had, they were thinking of doing having a Japanese director direct it, because, you know, it's all in Japanese and all the actors are Japanese. So I still wasn't like, I still wasn't sure whether it was going to be shown in theaters in the US. And I finally, you know, is this going to be in the US too? And he said, yes. And then when Clint Eastwood got on board to actually directing, then I thought, oh, wow, you know, people are going to actually see this. And then it became, you know, just very surreal once I found that out.
And the whole experience, I must say, it must have been like a dream sequence for you to experience the nomination and the critical acclaim.
Yeah, I mean, the story just kept getting better and better, because it was kind of went from, this is going to be an extra on the DVD to, you know, it's going to be in theaters. Oh, and then Clint Eastwood's going to direct it. And it was supposed to be released in February, and they were putting all their eggs into the Flags of Our Fathers basket for the awards. And they decided to just, after it was finished shooting, they just decided to move it up and release it earlier so it could qualify for awards. So, you know, the story just kept getting better and better and better. But, you know, they hadn't done any of the campaigns, you know, because they were campaigning Flags of Our Fathers. So it really entered late in the game as a contender for the awards. So it's kind of surprising that it actually did get a number of nominations and awards in the end. So
it's interesting because a lot of movies are pushed back to the next year if they don't think they're quite up to snuff. And yours was actually pushed up, which is just a reflection on the quality of the film. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So the sky's the limit for you, but it didn't really work out that way for you after, did it?
No, I mean, you know, this was back in 2006. And if you look at like the Writers Guild statistics for employed screenwriters, it's like something like 95% white and, you know, 80 something percent male back then. So, you know, diverse stories were not sought after, for sure. And I was known as the writer for, you know, Japanese historicals. Like that was sort of the peg, you know, that I was put in. So it was difficult to go after that, find something that people thought were commercial. So interestingly, you know, I would get hired to write scripts so I could still make a living. So I think producers and directors were a little more open to, you know, trying to tell diverse stories. But when it came to buyers, that's where, you know, that it just would never make it past the buyers, which is the studios. And, you know, nowadays it's streamers. I think it's much, much different now. Obviously, you know, we just had the Golden Globe winners being you know, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and having Michelle Yeoh and I don't butcher his name, so I'm not going to say it, but they getting awards. So they so that's very, very encouraging. Obviously, it's a much different world now. Statistics wise, it's still not great. Television and streaming is much more open. Movies are still difficult, but yeah, back compared to from when I started, it's much better, I think.
Yeah.
So if I were younger, if only I were younger.
We've talked before, and you know, it wasn't the writing that was the issue. It was the meetings, the groveling, all the stuff that you really don't, as a writer, you definitely do not want to do. And it seems to take precedence over the actual art itself.
Yeah, I think with films and streaming, there are a lot more people involved. There's a lot of hands in the pot. There's many layers. There's many posts, you have, or gates. There's many gates that you have to try to get through, which makes it a lot more difficult. And it does take a lot more people and a lot more money to actually produce something in Hollywood. So it can get really frustrating because you can pass several gates. And as I said, a lot of producers were very enthusiastic about diverse stories and directors and actors, who were on board. But then, it comes to the accountants, I guess, who say, well, it's like a chicken and egg situation. We don't have we don't have records of successful diverse stories or successful diverse actors because they weren't being given a chance to begin with, right? So it became, it just became something that was, I just felt like I was hitting a wall all the time. And so I think this is the result. This book is kind of a result of hitting those walls so many times that
well, Iris, I can only say that the movies industry's loss is literary world's gain. You've written a tremendous book. It's a thriller, and I mentioned I read it in a little over a day, and I think you had me at severed body parts at the very beginning. And if I couldn't sleep, obviously, after reading the first few chapters, so I had to keep reading. So if you can just tell our audience a brief synopsis of what your amazing book's about.
I think my favorite tag so far, I've done other interviews and podcasts, and I just saw one today where the tags are moose, berets, and Alice in Wonderland. Which made me, those are fun tags. It's a murder mystery, of course, and the main protagonist is a female detective who's trying to solve, as you said, this gruesome murder with body parts washing up on the shore. And it takes place in a very small Alaskan town. And the most interesting thing about the town is that all the residents live in a single high-rise building. It's inspired by a real city in Alaska. And but I changed the name of it because I didn't want the people living there to get angry because the characters are pretty strange and quirky. So I didn't want them to think it was about them. But I kept kind of that basic premise that everyone lives in a single building and the only way to reach the city is by a tunnel. And of course, an avalanche shuts the tunnel down and our protagonist is stuck in this very claustrophobic city. And she has her own reasons for being there, but pretty much everybody in the story, just like, any murder mystery, they're all suspects. So they all have secrets that they're hiding, and that includes the protagonist. And I tell it in 3 different voices. So I have the investigator, Kara Kennedy. I also have a teenager, Amy Lynn, and she's a resident there. She's the one who discovered the body parts on the shore, and her mother runs the local Chinese restaurant. And then the 3rd voice is Lonnie Mercer, and she is a resident with a mental disability, and she keeps a pet moose, which is why moose is a tag. And then the other thing is that she wears a different color beret every day. So that's why the tag is berets.
Interesting. We'll get to the characters in a sec, but I want to talk a little bit more about the setting. It's kind of based on an actual town, correct?
Yes, the real town is Whittier, Alaska. And yeah, there's a tunnel, a single lane tunnel, which switches directions every half hour. Oh, there's a picture of the tunnel. Yes.
Yeah.
It's kind
Sorry,
of like a
Wikipedia.
mining. Yeah. Yeah. It's very like claustrophobic because it's a single lane. And so every 30 minutes they switch directions, and the train also goes through this tunnel.
I actually looked at the tunnel schedule of Whittier, and they actually do that. So you can only go in one direction every 15, 20 minutes, and then it switches to the other side. So it's one way in, one way out. You're setting us up here, Iris. But if you could just expand on the town itself, you said it's under one roof, obviously, because that's the title. But it's a really interesting town that you create here. And if you could, yeah.
It was originally built as a military post in during, I think, World War II. And so there were two, so it was supposed to be kind of secretive. I think it was a secretive military base. That's why, the only way in is through that tunnel. And they had two high-rise buildings where the officers lived and worked, and or where the personnel, the military personnel lived and worked. And there was a big earthquake in I think it was 1964, and that pretty much shut the base down. And so one of those buildings is just a shell that they haven't torn down yet, and no one can live in there. It's too dangerous. And then the other building, they turned into these resident condominiums. And that's where in the real town, that's where most of the residents live. In my fictional story, that's where everybody lives. And yeah, they used to have like underground tunnels connecting the two buildings. So I kind of
really? Yeah.
that little tidbit as part of the story as well. So that you'll see a lot of tunnels in my story, not just the tunnel through the mountain, but there's pedestrian tunnels, there's underground tunnels, there's a tunnel that connects the condos to the school. So yeah.
It's really, this whole world, it was writing in such a contained thing. It reminds me, your storytelling reminds me of referring back to movies like a Paul Greengrass movie, like United 93, or Captain Phillips, the pirate movie with Tom Hanks, where everything seems to get smaller and smaller as you tell the story. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of new to the mystery world, but I've heard, the term locked room, which is sort of the impossible mystery where the murder happens in a room and you don't know how it's not that. But then there's another term they call like a locked city. So this is like a locked city mystery because the killer is somewhere in the building. Somewhere in the building. It's very claustrophobic, yeah.
And it seems, without revealing anything, that Kara faces challenges because not everybody seems to want this murder solved.
Yes, everybody is a suspect, of course, but everybody has a reason that they're here. They're in the first chapter, I have the teenager Amy talking about, well, the real reason that people are here is because they're, running away from somebody or something. And so, and including, and she has just discovered, she's just discovered her own family's secret as well, as to why they're there, which, comes out later in the book. But yeah, so that was sort of my first thought as I was researching this city. It was like, why are people here? Where the winds are 150 miles per hour, and the temperatures go to minus 35, and yeah, and this tunnel that shuts down at 10 o'clock at night, and then you're trapped there. So what kind of people might be living here? And I think it's changed since when I originally researched or when I saw the first documentary, which was over 20 years ago, when at that time you couldn't even go in by car, you had to go in by train. And so that was even more, that was even more limiting. And I heard that residents were really upset when they actually opened it up to the cars, because they were sort of like, I want to be left alone. So that was very interesting to me too. So that's why I was thinking like, well, what kind of people would live here? And I think that going through the tunnel as well, this is where the Alice in Wonderland tag comes in, is just when that picture that you had of the tunnel, when I was going through that, driving through that, I thought, oh, this is kind of like you're falling through the rabbit hole and you're going to end up in a really strange place that's like a wonderland that's full of odd characters. And so I have thrown in many Alice in Wonderland references in the book. Just the general one, when you think of Kara, she's kind of like the Alice that has dropped into the Wonderland. And Amy, I think of as the white rabbit. I have a little white rabbit here. White rabbit that she chases after for clues. And then Lonnie, of course, because she wears a different color beret every day and she has the mental disability, is the Mad Hatter.
Interesting. And you're not going to reveal who Cheshire Cat is then?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to reveal, but yeah, look for Cheshire Cat.
I actually haven't figured that out, so I'm going to have to reread it again. So was this whole story going on in your head while you're writing this, going down the tunnel, the rabbit hole? And
definitely that was a jumping off point when I was starting. I was thinking, the characters have to be as odd and strange, as they are in Alice in Wonderland, because a lot of, Alice in Wonderland to me didn't really make sense. But they were interesting characters, and I just thought like, oh, okay, let me reference, let's see if I can reference some, and, there's some lines in there. I went crazy. I even have something about the number, like there's a certain number that Lewis Carroll liked. And I was telling my writers group, let's all use that number in all our works, because I have a lot of writers in that I workshop with, and then that was the pact. I don't know if they're gonna stick with that idea, but it's like, let's always use that number.
Interesting. So did they agree on it? Is there a pact?
Yeah, I don't know if they even remember it. I think I'm the only one who's geeky enough to actually stick to it.
So getting back to your characters, not only reminiscent, obviously, of Alice in Wonderland, but there are three strong yet a little bit fallible women in the group. Was your intention to keep the three main protagonists female, and what was your decision-making process about picking the characters?
Yeah, I don't know really why. I think there was a point when I had, well, maybe for book 2, I think it was that I was going to have a male voice, and then it ended up being 3 female again. And I'm not really sure why, but it seemed like I just was choosing the characters that seemed like they had the most interesting things to tell in their background. So I think that's what it was, that and having like very distinct voices. Like I didn't like, Kara is kind of the straight woman. Like she kind of plays straight, and so I didn't want to have any other characters like that. I wanted to have characters that you could tell their voice uniquely for each chapter. So they're very different. So Kara is obviously, she's the investigator, and then Amy, being a teen, had a very different voice. from Kara, and then Lonnie, of course, had a different voice from anybody, pretty much. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I think that's
Interesting.
what it was. Yeah.
Okay. You you just slipped and said book two.
Oh, yeah. So I am working on a sequel, which is due in a few weeks, actually. So yeah, my head is somewhat over there too. But yeah, there will be a sequel.
Okay. Well, let's stick with this one now. We got that to look forward to. I'm gonna have to wait for a little while, so you better get on that as quickly as you can. We have some questions coming in. We'll get to those toward the end. We'll get to all those questions. I want to get back to the Amy character. She's a teenager, and the experiences of a teenager in general are very different, and it's a very difficult time for a teenager. But to be in Alaska in a remote place, how are you able to write Amy's character? And she has friends as well that you wrote in there.
Yeah, I think definitely a teen would have a very different feeling of living there. If like she wouldn't, I just imagine she wouldn't want to be there, while her parents or the adults living there would have a different view. And I did live on the island of Guam for 4 years, which, I mean, it's not exactly the same as living in a single building, but
Mhm.
back then, because I'm old, we didn't have internet. We didn't have,
Yeah.
the phone worked sometimes. And so I think I probably went through a similar kind of experience where it felt like, oh, there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. You
Uh-huh.
can't go see a concert, or, there's really not much to do on the island, especially when I was living there back then. I think there's more stuff to do now, but
Mhm.
yeah, and this was a time when we didn't have internet, and we didn't have much of anything. The television, there were like 3 channels, and that was it.
Mhm.
So it's I think I went through a somewhat similar experience, and that was just how I imagined that she would be feeling.
Interesting. And I want to get back to Lonnie as well, because Lonnie is my favorite character in the book. And she had so many berets. She has a moose, but she also has a mental disability. I'm thinking possibly schizophrenia, maybe, or something of that nature. And I'm wondering how you were able to write that and be inside Lonnie's head, so to speak.
Yeah, she has schizophrenia. I imagine a combination of schizophrenia and OCD. I didn't want to
Mhm.
name it in particular, but some of it comes from her trauma that she had as a child. So I did look at some videos of people with schizophrenia and how they do kind of talk in word salads, where they'll just um, go off into tangents, and just they're making connections, but it doesn't make sense to us. um and they do have this kind of paranoia sometimes.
Mhm.
So I put some of that in there, but then in my mind, I also feel like she is much smarter than people think. She thinks in a different way as everyone else, but she's very intuitive.
Mm. She is. She's very intuitive, and she's got the greatest sidekick there is out there with the moose. Where did you get the idea of writing a moose in your story?
um I think it comes from, like, like watching Twin Peaks and really having that, like really enjoying that, and trying to think of things that would um fall in place in a David Lynch kind of Twin Peaks world.
Mhm.
So I think that's where it came from.
Okay. So when you're writing these characters, were they speaking to you, or was there struggle for within the characters for them to go a different way from the way you were planning to write the book?
Yeah, I think, authors kind of do enjoy when when their characters start to speak to them, and you learn things, because you didn't start off with your characters being this way, and then you learn something just by writing them, just like it just, I don't know what it is, but they kind of grow on you, and you kind of start to understand who they are. Even as the author, you might not know in the beginning, and then as you start writing it goes in directions. So I didn't know what Amy's secret was until I started writing.
So you didn't force your will upon Amy. Amy revealed herself to you. Then is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's funny how there's certain things that you write and you don't even know that it's going to be important later. Just little details where you can call back and like, oh, I remember I wrote this thing in the beginning. Let me do a callback to that item or that thing. And sometimes, when I was writing this and I passed it by my writers group, and they would raise the question, so this item that you wrote about, that's coming back, right? And I would say, oh, I didn't even think about that, but I'm going to write it in now, So sometimes there are questions that, when you pass it by other people, that inspire you to go, oh, you get ideas from your fellow workshoppers.
A lot of writers go it alone, but you were pretty open about this writers group. It seems like they're very supportive
Well, we're
in
all
helping you.
writers. First of all, we're all professional writers. Everyone works in the Hollywood industry. And then all of us, we started out all writing screenplays, and then slowly we're all writing novels now. Yeah, it's interesting how that happened.
It seems like that's the preferred genre. A few months ago, we had David Koepp, who wrote the Jurassic Park screenplays. He's having a ball writing. He just wrote a book called Aurora. It's a thriller. He's having a ball doing that. And I was wondering if that's the same with you. Do you feel liberated by writing a book?
Yes, for sure. I think in Hollywood, you are always writing someone else's story is the problem. All of us writers, we want to write original material.
Yes.
But when you're working in Hollywood, most of the time it's on assignment, which means that you're the hired writer. So they already have a book in mind that they want someone to turn into a script, or they already have a remake, or some IP, some intellectual property that they own, that they want to always be in control. First of all,
yeah.
So that means they can hire you and then fire you if you come in with an original script or original material. That kind of means they can't fire you. They can hire someone else, but you're definitely going to get credit for an original screenplay, right? So so most of the time you're not working on something original, which that in itself is limiting. And then you have so many hats involved who are going to tell you their vision of how they want to see the script play out. And if they don't like your vision, again, they can just fire you and hire someone else. So the book is very liberating, because first of all, you can write your original material, and then second of all, you can play it out the way you see it. You're the director, you're the cinematographer, you're the costume designer, the casting director, you're all of that. and it doesn't take as much money and as much
Yeah.
as many people, because money is another limiting factor. If if you're writing a big gigantic blockbuster, there's only so many writers they're going to hire for that. Then otherwise you're limited to a much smaller budget. And then, all these things like, where can we get a tax credit? What state can we go to film this?
Yeah.
We can't do big budgets. So how can we make it cheaper? There's a lot of that too.
Interesting. So you really, it seems like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you a novelist now? Would you say?
I definitely want, I'm writing the sequel, so I definitely want to keep doing this. I still do have a foot in the door. As I said, it's really hard to get diverse stories out there, but I do have a few projects that have a diverse cast or it's a diverse story, and knocking on wood that this, with the feeling that they're opening up to those kind of stories, that maybe one of them will make it through. So I still do have that one foot in the door, but I feel much more relieved that I don't have to rely on Hollywood, that I do have this side too that I really enjoy, and that is, it has been such a warm welcome to this world that I really enjoy it.
That's great. That's great. Before I turn it over to the audience questions, you wrote this during, part of it at least, during COVID. And I'm wondering if COVID played an influence on telling this story.
Well, I started writing it before COVID. I think COVID definitely helped me, because it gave me a little more time to work on it, because I didn't have to drive to all these meetings across town, and everything was going to be by Zoom now. So that really helped. And I think even selling the book, it might have been because of COVID. I don't know. I know my agent, when we were trying to sell this, it was sort of, she was saying, these are strange times, so who knows what will happen, because I hadn't actually finished the manuscript at the time that she said, because she couldn't wait for me any longer, because I was working on this whenever I had spare time. And so it took me 2 years just to get, halfway through. And so but she really liked my beginning. And so she kept saying, is it done yet? Is it done yet? And I, no, it's not done yet. It's not done yet. She's like, these are crazy times because we're in the middle of COVID. So let's see if we can sell your partial manuscript. And so she sent the partial manuscript to Berkeley, which is, where I got the deal.
Yeah.
And it was going to, she said, let's try an exclusive and see what they say. If they don't like it, we can go somewhere else later, but let's just try this. And miraculously, I got the deal. So
wow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say miraculously. I mean, talent had a lot to do with that deal. I would say maybe it boosted you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, she said, I've never sold a partial manuscript before, but let's just try this, because it's a crazy time right now. So, but yeah, that was amazing that I was able to do that.
Because, Iris, that I've been in the book world just a few years, but I know well enough that getting a deal on a partial manuscript is rare.
Very rare. Probably getting a 2-book deal is probably even rarer, because I didn't expect that one either. But I just pitched my book, because I had originally planned this for like a streaming series. So I had kind of mapped it out as seasons. So book 1 is season 1, book 2, possibly season 2. So I pitched the book 2 idea as well. And so I got a 2-book deal.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question before we have some audience questions. It looks like you dedicated the book to your mom.
Oh, yes.
And Kyoko, is it?
Yes.
correct?
Hmm.
Okay. So talk a little bit about your parents. Just for those readers, uh, Iris's parents came over from Japan. She's Shinise, I should say.
Yes.
He was a Fulbright scholar, ophthalmologist, doctor of ophthalmology, but they also they wanted you to be academic.
Yeah. Wow. You've really done your homework. Yeah, my parents didn't want me to be a writer. Um, Especially my dad, he was really upset when I went to screenwriting actually. And, when I told him that I had a job with Clint Eastwood, he said, "Who's that?" So he wasn't very, I mean, he came around when I got nominated for the Academy Award. But my mom was always kind of supportive. I think she wanted to be a writer too, because she would tell me stories about, she was always lauded for her storytelling in school. And, and she liked reading my stories. And so I think, she had that creative knack in her. She always said she was going to write a book about her family.
Mm,
So she actually started, but just like me, she never finished. She didn't finish her novel.
yeah,
But I would actually like record her when she was talking about her family. And
yeah,
it was, she would only talk in Japanese when she was doing that because it was easier for
okay,
her. So I didn't quite understand all of it. But
yeah.
I think my first big break, or not big break, my first published short story was based on something that she had told me about her family. So yeah. So
It's
she had the same, she had kind of the creative gene in her, I think, that I got from her.
I think that was a really nice touch, I have to say. It's a really nice tribute to her, and it reminds me of the filmmaker Hirokazu Koreeda, who did Shoplifters and the new film Broker, which I highly recommend. He wrote this film called After the Storm, and he wrote this line of saying that what matters is you live your life trying to be what you want to be. And he said he wrote that with his parents in mind. And I think this is you living your life. I think it's a really wonderful thing that you're living your literary life being what you want to be. It's a wonderful way to live life. So,
Yeah.
all right, enough of the schmaltz here. I got a couple questions. And a person wanted to know, why would somebody want to live in such a remote place?
Well, that is the question that I started out with that made me want to write this, is like, what kind of people would want to live here? And again, I kind of hint that, everybody's running from something or someone. When I was doing research for this story in the real town of Whittier, Alaska, and this was back when there was no car traffic and the only way in was by train. Then I had read that one of the residents wanted to keep her ex-husband out. So the train conductor would be on the lookout for her ex-husband and wouldn't let him get on the train.
Oh,
So yes, so that was one of the stories that I had read. And that was very
interesting.
intriguing to me, that there was like a gatekeeper.
Interesting. Another attendee wanted to know, in your literary works, how do you work with theme? What's the starting point, and how do you process this?
In screenplays, I do always start with an outline. And one of the things that I outline is, what is the theme? I always ask, why am I trying to tell this story? What kind of thing can the protagonist or the audience get from this? Like what's the journey? So what, right, what are the themes that can work in multiple levels? Like there's the, obviously you have the action arcs and the action story that's going on, but then what is going on underneath? So what are the emotional journeys, and what are some of the themes? Like when I was working on Letters from Iwo Jima, I did have a discussion with Paul Haggis when he was talking about his movie Flags of Our Fathers. And he had mentioned that the things that he questioned, because he said, we always have questions, we don't always have answers, but he as a writer was questioning, what is a hero? What makes a hero? Why do we need heroes? He was talking about this as a theme. And then I thought about that and I'm like, oh, what's really interesting? That's a huge difference between the American soldiers and the Japanese soldiers, was that when American soldiers return, they're the heroes. The ones that return are the heroes. Whereas in Japan, the soldiers that returned were the cowards. Like you're supposed to die. You're supposed to die in the war. And that was so that was a very different idea of what is a hero. And I thought that's really interesting. I should, and so I tried to layer a little bit of that theme in there about like, again, the theme of the hero and what is the hero. My protagonist wants to live, and then that would be considered cowardly, but it's human instinct. So, that struggle between your human instinct and then what what you think is required of you is, at odds.
But it's interesting you wrote that, because in Letters from Iwo Jima, Saigo is my favorite character. And he's the one that they accused of being a coward. Saigo in Japanese means last.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah.
And I thought, this is my favorite. I mean, of course, Ken Watanabe, he's just a wonderful actor and just such a powerful general. But Saigo was the one that you would root for.
Right. Like Ken Watanabe is more of the traditional classic
Japanese
hero character, right? But I, after reading a lot of there weren't many personal letters from the actual Iwo Jima battle, but there were letters of people who survived other battles in Japan or in Japanese battles. And, in retrospect, all of them, obviously they wanted to live, they couldn't say it, but they wanted to live. And I just thought, would that make you a coward if you wanted to live? Because here, obviously, if you came back and you were a hero. So that was, it was just something that was interesting that again, I don't have the answers, but something I wanted to explore.
Interesting. This next question is kind of wordy, so I'm going to have to refer them to you. Let's see if I can do this here. Are you there? Okay. I think you have to accept to come on. Oh, you have to accept. All right, here they come.
Oh, my former neighbors, Barbara.
John and Barbara. They came in the store and I wanted to bring them on because they had a question for you, but I wanted them to ask.
They're muted, I think, or I can't.
Okay, you probably want to turn on your mics.
Okay, there we are.
Oh,
hey.
Hello. It's so nice to see you.
It's so good to see you too. So Michael, do you want me to ask the question?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's your question.
Sure, I will. I was at the dermatologist, by the way, so I'm fine.
No.
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry.
Anyway, my question is this. We both love the book. And the twists and turns and how you brought it all together at the end, you're just amazing. I couldn't get over it.
Thank you. You've already read it. That's so
Oh,
nice.
yes, we both read it. Yeah, I came in and bought it from Michael a week ago. But anyway, so I enjoyed all three protagonists, and I felt they were, very strongly drawn, but my favorite was Amy. And what intrigued me was, as far as we know, you and John don't have kids, but you clearly had a sense of the teens and their world, and also you clearly enjoyed those kids, really enjoyed them, I felt, when you wrote about them. So I'm wondering if you modeled them after any relative, or if how you got them.
I didn't really model them I didn't model Amy after anyone I knew. And interestingly, when I first was writing Amy, I didn't have her voice quite down, and she was kind of, I guess, boring is the word. And then again, my fellow writers in my writers group kind of mentioned that she didn't have a voice. And I thought, oh gosh, I gotta try to make her sound more teenagery. And I just was thinking, yeah, I do have nieces and nephews. I wasn't modeling it after anything that they said or that the way they were, but in general, I think I was trying to pay more attention to how teenagers speak, and a lot of times they have a faster rhythm, like they speak very quickly. And so I was trying to capture some of that in the long, the kind of the run-on sentences where, it's just all these hyphens. And just that was my way of trying to make her more interesting. I was just trying to think of a way to make her sound more like a teenager.
Well, I think by the time we read the book, it was like she was so much fun, and it was like you really enjoyed writing her.
Yeah, I discovered also, as I said, I didn't know what her secret was until I started writing her. So I kind of enjoyed that process of discovering who she was and what her relationship with her mom was. It wasn't all there in the outline phase, but once you start writing a character, as a lot of writers say, the characters start to speak to you, and you start to have more of a sense of who they are.
Yeah.